Chapter 6. A Surprising Discovery. Suzette couldn't sleep until she heard Papa creep inside the wigwam late that night. When she woke at first light the next morning, he was gone again. The rest of the family was already outside. Mama was flying frat bread for the morning meal. "Where's Papa?" Suzette asked her. "On the lake. It is the best place for him right now." Mama's voice was understanding, but sad. "He should have taken me with him," Yellowwing muttered. "If he's guilty, I'm guilty too." "No one in this family is guilty." Mama pinched her lips in a tight line and slapped a ball of dough on her rolling stone so hard that the dough crumbled. Suzette stared at the ground. Mama never spoke in such a tone. Suzette felt as if her family were crumbling just like the dough. Suzette knew her father had not stolen the furs, but D'Amboise believed he could have. If the true thief was not found, her father might be banished. Where would he take his family? Deeper into the woods on the mainland, away from his beloved lake, away from their own band of Ojibwe people? Could they survive? Would they be welcome anywhere? Suddenly, two fishes' forgotten insult rang in her mind. "Blue eyes, you are an ugly girl. I'm glad you're not my sister. I'd be ashamed." She had shrugged his words aside at the time, but now they sliced into her heart. What if other people felt the way Two Fish did? She clenched her fists. Away from La Pointe, would her blue eyes always mark her as different? She couldn't hide who she was, but she suddenly wished she could. If only Papa were Ojibwe too. No. Suzette felt her face burn with shame. She might wish she had beautiful dark eyes like Mama's, but she could never wish her father was anyone but Papa. "Suzette!" Mama was staring at her. "Are you listening? I want you to finish the flatbread, and I need you to tend Charlotte this morning. Grandmother and I promised to help some of the other women in the garden." "Aye, Mama," Suzette sighed. It was her responsibility to help Charlotte, and she hadn't done much of that lately. Yellowwing stayed behind too. After eating, he brought out a fish trap that needed repairing. Suzette settled Charlotte on a blanket in the shade. Cleaning up from the morning meal didn't take long, and she didn't have the heart to work on Papa's beaded vest. Finally, she settled down in the shade with a red shirt of Papa's that needed mending. Slipping the needle in and out of the fabric occupied her hands and left her mind free to wrestle with the family's problems. Too much had happened since they'd left the mainland. First the canoe that almost capsized, then the theft that robbed Papa of his chance to pay off his debt. Yellowwing muttered and swatted away a mosquito. Suzette let her sewing rest, regarding him. He would know the other men on the island better than anyone else she could ask. "Yellowwing, may I ask you a question?" "Just don't ask me about the furs." He shifted the fish trap on his lap and tried to weave a branch into place. It snapped, and he tossed it into the fire. "Do you know Niskigwan well?" "No. Why?" "He's not very nice." Yellowwing's mouth twitched toward a smile. "Maybe he just doesn't like disrespectful girls." Suzette made a face. She knew she sometimes talked more than was proper, but she was never as rude as Niskigwan or his son. Yesterday at the trading post he was bragging that he would have won the contest if it hadn't been cancelled. "Niskigwan can be full of his own glories," Yellowwing agreed, "but he's also a very skillful trapper. He probably had a good chance." Suzette swallowed her disappointment. She had wanted Yellowwing to tell her that Niskigwan was desperate to win, that he had wagered his canoe on the competition, or something like that. She had been foolish to even think it might be so simple. With a heavy sigh, Suzette picked up her sewing again. Yellowwing must have heard her. "Suzette, I don't know if your papa trapped more furs than Niskigwan over the winter," he said gently, "but I do know that your papa is an honest man who works hard for his family. He did as well as any man in his place could have." "I know." Suzette forced herself to study her sewing, taking the tiny stitches Mama had taught her, and tried again to figure out how to bend the conversation where she wanted it to go. "But he doesn't like trapping. It's been hard for him. I think it's difficult for any voyageur who has to give up paddling. Like Big Nicholas. He knows his arm will never be strong enough for him to be a voyageur again." "I've never heard him complain." Yellowwing picked up the trap again. "I imagine he'd like to go back to Montreal, if he could," Suzette suggested. But Yellowwing shook his head. "No, just the opposite. Shortly after we crossed from the mainland, he was asking a number of us lots of questions about the island. What the country was like, whether there was any open land, whether there were any caves, how long it took to walk across it, how much copper was in the soil. He was taking a strong interest in the island for someone dreaming of leaving it." "Oh." So Big Nicholas was not desperately trying to win the prize so he could buy passage back to Montreal. Suzette sat back on her heels, disappointed again. Nothing made sense. By the time Mamma and Grandmother returned, Suzette had tidied the lodge and fixed a kettle of dried June berries simmered with maple sugar. "Mamma, may I go to the trading post?" she asked. She didn't know where to look for the stolen furs, but she could still try to find out exactly what she was looking for. The only person who could help her with that was Monsieur Roussain. As Suzette was leaving, Grandmother shook her head at Mamma. "Shining Stone, it would be better if you didn't let Ajaouac spend so much time learning the French language. I worry that she is walking down the wrong path." "I've tried to teach her well," Mamma said quietly, "and she has learned many things from you. But Suzette is métisse, both Ojibwe and French. Her papa has different ideas." Suzette pretended she hadn't heard, and hurried away. She wanted to respect Grandmother's feelings, but she didn't understand why Grandmother was so often critical of French ways. Hadn't she chosen a French man for her first husband? Besides, Suzette enjoyed her time spent with Monsieur Roussain, and now her lessons had taken on new importance. Perhaps those ledgers held the answer she was looking for. She arrived at the store as Monsieur Roussain was showing several families some of the new trade goods. She hesitated in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. Her teacher had surely heard that Captain D'Amboise had searched their camp the evening before. Perhaps... "Suzette," Roussain called, "I'm glad you're here. I could use your help." Relieved, Suzette joined him behind the counter. At his direction, she carefully wrote each customer's transactions in the ledger. "You're doing well," Roussain said, looking over her entries after all the customers had left. "Merci, monsieur." His praise made her feel good. "I like reading and writing." He rubbed his chin with ink-stained fingers. "I should loan you a book, one with stories in it. Would you like that? Stories would help pass the time, especially in winter. You must get terribly bored." "Bored?" Suzette hesitated. "I am sure I would enjoy a book with stories in it, monsieur. It's kind of you to think of it." "But we do have stories. Grandmother is a wonderful storyteller, and Yellow Wing." Her voice trailed away as another Ojibwe family came in. She watched Roussain show them the newly arrived bolts of cloth. Did he understand? Yes, winters could be bitterly cold and quiet in the little family camp deep in the woods. But winter was also a time to snuggle around the fire in their warm wigwam and listen to the elders tell wonderful tales of how things came to be. Did he think Ojibwe people had no stories just because they weren't written down with letters? "I'll explain it to him one day," Suzette thought. But she could see it needed to wait until another time, when he wasn't so busy, and she didn't already have so much on her mind. "I'm glad you came by," Monsieur Roussain said when they were alone again. "I've been busy since sunup. In addition to everyone wanting to see the new goods the voyagers brought, all the trappers have been bringing in their last loads of furs. I'm trying to get the pelts baled up and inventoried back in the storage room, and—" "I can help you with that," Suzette offered. Maybe she could find a record of the stolen furs. Good. He pushed open the door behind the counter and led her into the storage room. "Oh," Suzette exclaimed, "I've never seen it so full." Many trappers must have come by in the past day or so, for the narrow room was almost bursting with pelts. Beaver, bear, deer, muskrat, otter, raccoon. Some were hanging from poles suspended from the ceiling. Some were stacked on the floor. "As I said, we're behind," Roussain sighed, pointing to two sweaty laborers working on the huge fur press that squatted in the middle of the floor. "They're pressing furs into bales." "Michel, make sure that bale is pressed tight. There's no room to spare in the canoes." Suzette watched as the men finished pressing the furs and tied thin ropes securely around the stack. One of the laborers hauled the bale over to the wall near Roussain's high desk. The other man carefully placed a piece of paper on top of the bale, tucking a corner beneath the rope binding. As the men began gathering furs to press into the next bale, she went to look at the row of finished, hip-tall bales near the desk. She tried to lift one. Too heavy. Each of these bales had a piece of paper lying on it, and she slid one free to examine. 1 bear, 12 deer, 32 beaver, 3 otter. "We make an inventory list of the furs packed into each bale," Roussain explained as he joined her. He opened a big ledger on his desk. "Each of those inventories needs to be copied into this ledger. Then the original list gets tucked under the rope, and the bale is wrapped securely with burlap and tied again." He pointed to the far wall, where a huge pile of neatly packaged bales were already awaiting the voyageurs' departure. Clerks in Montreal check the contents again when the furs are unpacked. Hussein thumbed through the ledger. Here, this is where I left off. Suzette looked at the ledger page, covered with Hussein's neat writing. Monsieur, she asked, is there a record of the stolen furs? I'm afraid not. I knew when one bale was missing because I knew how many we had. I had made an inventory list, but I hadn't had time to copy it into the ledger. Oh, Suzette felt flooded with disappointment. How could anyone track the stolen furs if they didn't even know what to look for? Hussein sat on a bale. My little friend, try not to worry. Suzette struggled to contain her frustration. I'm afraid we'll never find the answer, and then... Her voice trailed away. Did you know that Captain D'Amboise suspects Papa? Hussein seemed to pick his words carefully. I know he asked questions. He studied the floor for a moment, then sighed. Suzette, keeping busy may be the best thing for you right now. Work on copying these inventory lists into the ledger, eh? Mark an X on each as you're finished, so I'll know which have been entered. And maybe I'll make some chocolat. You like that, no? Suzette tried to smile. She didn't want to hurt her friend's feelings. He considered it a great treat to serve the warm chocolat drink. It would take more than that, however, to make her forget the theft. But, monsieur, you said you made an inventory list for the stolen bale. So it was still on top of the bale when it was stolen? Hussein rubbed his chin. Oui, I suppose. But... Suddenly he turned his head. Someone else had come into the next room. I can't leave the store unattended. You stay here and begin working. Just don't get in the men's way. Suzette nodded. Perched on the high stool at the desk, she began copying the first inventory list into the ledger. She worked carefully, trying not to make any blots. But thoughts of the missing inventory kept nudging into her mind. Concentrate, she scolded herself. Captain D'Amboise and Baptiste had been investigating the theft. If the thief hadn't noticed the inventory or known what it was, and it slipped onto the floor, they would have found it. She began writing again, but when she misspelled the French word for otter, loutre, she put the pen aside for good. There was no harm in looking herself. She glanced quickly at the laborers. They were leaning on the handle of the fur press, grunting with exertion. Neither was paying any attention to her. Suzette scrambled onto the nearest bale and stretched her arm into the crevice between it and the wall. She searched along the whole row of bales, cramming her fingers into cracks, peering into dim quarters. Then she searched along the route from the bales to the door, looking under work tables and behind piles of fur. Nothing. She sat back on her stool, trying to think. One of the laborers lit his pipe, snatching a grape during Hussein's absence. Squeals from some children's ball game drifted through the window at the back of the room. The window! Suzette jumped to her feet. The post's only glass windows were in Captain D'Amboise's room and in the store. The storage room window had wooden shutters only, barred from the outside. Maybe the thief hadn't calmly carried the bale out the front door, which led into the open common area of the fort. Maybe he'd climbed out the window. When the laborers went back to work, Suzette walked the length of the room toward the window. No sign of the lost inventory. She chewed her lip, considering. If the thief had grabbed a bale in the dark and lugged it to the window, he probably dropped it out the window, then climbed out himself. She checked the floor near the low window, then leaned over the sill, scanning the narrow length of dirt between the storage room and the stockade wall. Nothing. And then she saw it. Not on the open ground, but beneath a honeysuckle bush growing against the wall near the window. At least it might be the lost inventory. All she could see was a corner of dirty white paper. She leaned out the open window, stretching. Almost got it. Not quite. Oof! She grunted as the windowsill cut into her belly. She almost lost her balance, and for one wild moment she thought she was going to tumble out into the yard. Then she pinched the slip of paper and slid back into the room. The two laborers were staring at her. I was just looking for something, Suzette said, feeling her face flush. They rolled their eyes at each other and went back to work. Suzette turned away and quickly examined the paper. It was crumpled and dirty, with one corner missing. But it was an inventory. She scanned the French words. 1 black bear, 40 beaver. Oh, she gasped! The inventory contained an odd note. 3 of these beaver have a noticeable golden streak down the back, almost a stripe. Very unusual. 2 credits each. Suzette wanted to dance. Now she knew what to search for. She started to run triumphantly into the other room to show Hussein. The babble of voices stopped her. She didn't want everyone on the island talking about this discovery. For some reason, her grandmother's words about wasting her time learning to read French popped into her mind. "You're wrong, Grandmother," she whispered triumphantly. If she could find the beaver pelts with golden stripes, she would find the thief.